Hello. In this episode, we're going to be talking about depression. We will discuss the symptoms of it and the developmental and biological causes of the mood disorder. We'll also discuss the psychological theories and many ways that you can support yourself through it. Firstly, let's understand what depression actually is. We all feel a bit down sometimes, but this feeling of sadness is something that we can all relate to, especially on those dark, rainy nights or when something bad has happened to our lives. This is perfectly fine and pretty inevitable, but depression is different to that. Depression is different for everybody, but this is how I would describe it. It's like you are being forced to watch yourself lose control over your life. Like life has become dull and appears meaningless, and that you are led by your thoughts that you feel you have no control over, despite knowing that they aren't good for you. There is a big difference between feeling sad and being depressed. Clinical depression is categorized as a low mood that has persisted for over 2 weeks and affects your everyday life. In its mildest form, depression doesn't stop you from leading a normal life, but it does make everything harder, and it seems less worthwhile. At its most severe, depression is an all-encompassing, life-threatening illness that can remove your will to live. Understanding some of the demographics can help to give you a sense of the scale of just how many people are suffering with this illness right now. In 2021, 21% of adults in the UK had experienced clinical relevant levels of depression, over double the pre-COVID 10% level. Currently, it is estimated that 2,950,709 adults have been diagnosed with a form of depression, of which 1,085,000 are over the age of 60. The government declared child and adolescent mental health a national emergency after multiple surveys showed the vast extent of this issue. 1 in 6 or 2 million children have mental health problems as of July 2021, a massive leap from the 1 in 9 in 2017. By the end of January 2022, 1.54 million children were treated with mental health issues, and an estimated 65,433 of them have been clinically diagnosed with depression. I know that I am being quite heavy and may seem pretty doom and gloom, but it's essential to recognise that this is just not another thing going wrong. These are not just numbers. These are people, just like you and me, who are suffering right now. It's important to confront the issue, to stop, pause, and think for a second, what do those statistics mean to you? To me, it means I'm not alone. Many people out there have unfortunately gone through a similar thing to me. It also gives me motivation to find ways that I can understand and provide support to the other people. So, if you're going through depression, or you want to understand it better, the first thing that you may need to know is what the different types of depression are. Seasonal affective disorder, dysmorphia, pre- and postnatal depression, as well as major depression disorder, general anxiety and depression disorder, and atypical depression, each of which have slightly different variations in symptoms and treatments. I'll separate the common signs and symptoms into psychological and behavioural. Psychologically, someone going through a form of depression may be experiencing feeling restless, agitated or irritable, guilty, worthless, empty and numb. They may have lost their self-confidence or have overwhelming urges to self-isolate and struggle to find pleasure in life or the things that they previously enjoyed. These psychological symptoms often culminate in an individual feeling hopeless or suicidal. The symptoms also show differently in different people. For example, feeling guilty about not helping just one family member could be enough to trigger somebody's depression, but for someone else, they could be feeling guilty about everything and everyone in their day-to-day life, and that could also lead to clinical depression. We are all different and respond to life in different ways. These lists of symptoms are just a way of helping the healthcare professional notice aspects that they can help you with. While thinking about what I wanted to include in this podcast, I struggled to know how to articulate to someone that may not understand the gravity of these simple words. So I thought it would be easier to read some quotes to you from individuals battling depression. It's so difficult to describe depression to someone who's never been there because it's not sadness, but it's a cold absence of feeling, that hollowed out feeling of paralysing numbness. J.K. Rowling, 2010. After every Olympics, I fell into a major state of depression, and after 2012 I was probably the hardest fall for me. I'd conquered the world and achieved every goal I'd ever set myself, and yet I couldn't shake that constant feeling of worthlessness and shame. I was done acting, I was done being alive. Michael Phelps, 2018. Depression doesn't fight fair. It drives you away from everyone that cares about you, isolating you while playing compounding tricks on your mind, all before you even notice it happening. Then when you turn around again, the world has moved on without you. You are left alone with this character of yourself that you hate. Stephen Fry. These are the things that are going on inside someone's head. Often someone who is depressed struggles to voice these symptoms, so knowing the behavioural changes in someone can help you identify if they are struggling. These behavioural characteristics include avoiding social events and activities, difficulty speaking or thinking clearly, losing interest in sex, irregular sleeping and eating patterns, using more tobacco, alcohol and other drugs more than usual, self-harming and increased aggression. Suppose that you notice that you are experiencing delusions like paranoia, or experiencing hallucinations like hearing, seeing, or in some cases feeling things that aren't there. That could be a sign that you are experiencing psychosis, and you should contact your GP immediately. A typical example is hearing a voice or a noise related to a trauma or suppressed event. Noticing these symptoms is the first step in managing your own mental health or helping somebody else to manage it. Over time, it gets easier to recognize these symptoms in yourself and in other people. Some of them are pretty blatantly related to a form of depression, like talking negatively about yourself or self-harming. But often, something like aggression gets overlooked as a symptom. But once we delve deeper, it becomes important to understand that your thoughts lead to your emotions, which leads to your behaviours, which means that every behaviour stems from a thought. Sometimes we struggle to express our emotions correctly. Mental illnesses are incredibly confusing, especially for children or neurodiverse individuals. This means that people experiencing depression find other outlets to express the intensity of those thoughts and feelings that have built up. If someone struggles to verbally express these experiences, which is common, they may show it in the form of aggression, for example. Our brains are quick to judge people naturally, and that's completely understandable. For millions of years we have developed this judgment tool to protect ourselves, but sometimes it isn't quite what we see on the surface. Our judgments are wrong. I'll give you an example. Your boss demands a lot from you. They swear a lot and don't listen to you. They are unhygienic and has lost loads of weight recently. They appear visibly tired and often lose their temper at their other team members. Getting caught up in how those things negatively affect you is easy, and you begin to demonize them a little. It becomes difficult to look past all those negative characteristics. But underneath all that, they're a person just like you and me, and although it does not excuse their poor behaviour, it is important to think a little deeper. What are they going through that is causing them to act that way? What support are they getting? Is there someone that you can talk to about getting yourself and your boss support to deal with these issues? It's not your responsibility to make them behave, but you can try and build empathy towards them. I realise that this is a pretty specific example, but you can apply its principles to pretty much anything. To a friend that has stopped replying to you or a family member that has changed their behaviour. Once you've spotted those symptoms and shown empathy, you can seek help. There are many different therapies and self-help options available for you. Throughout these podcasts and in the wider world of mental health, there are some fancy sounding words and confusing anagrams that could be confusing or daunting. So when we go over these ways of helping yourself, it could be important to write down some questions or Google it when you get time, as it's important to know that if you get confused by something, it's worth finding out what it means. So let's explore the different clinical therapies or treatments for depression. Within the NHS, there are two main types of therapy: talkative therapies and non-talkative therapies. Most of the time, the NHS will refer you to a version of CBT, a kind of talkative therapy. This is because the CBT model is seen as the most effective for the greater proportion of the population. So what is CBT? Well, it stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. It is based on the idea that how we think, our cognition, how we feel, our emotions, and how we act, our behaviours, all interact together. In other words, how our thoughts determine how we feel and our behaviour. CBT aims to help people become aware of our negative thoughts and behavioural patterns that are not constructive. Cognitive therapy helps people develop alternative ways of thinking and behaving to reduce psychological distress. CBT can also be separated into high and low intensity, depending on your needs. Depending on the issue that you're dealing with and your goals, there are several ways to approach talkative therapies. Whatever approach your therapist takes, it will include identifying specific problems or issues in your daily life, becoming aware of unproductive thoughts and patterns and how they impact your life, identifying negative thinking and reshaping it in a way that changes how you feel, learning new behaviours and putting them into practice. Another typical talkative therapy is DBT, which stands for Dialectical Behavioural Therapy. This therapy focuses on coping mechanisms that can help you regulate your emotions. It focuses on four main skills: mindfulness, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, which is pretty much a fancy way of saying how you communicate your emotions and intentions effectively, and finally, emotional regulation. Another therapy is a psychodynamic psychotherapy, which is a fancy sounding therapy that looks at how your childhood experiences and thoughts you may be unaware of affect your thoughts and feelings now. That is commonly delivered in a round of 16 sessions. However, for depression, a short-term model is often used. Another therapy is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or MBCT for short. This combines mindfulness techniques like meditation, grounding, and breathing exercises with regular therapy. Interpersonal therapy, or IPT, is another talkative therapy designed to help people with depression address problems with their relationships, be it family, partners, or friends. The idea is that having a poor relationship with your potential support networks could leave you feeling more depressed. Depression also commonly causes individuals to move away from those support networks like friends and family, meaning that this could be an important aspect of your life to work on. It might be offered to you if you have mild to moderate depression that doesn't respond well to other talkative therapies, and it is usually offered for 16 to 20 sessions. The fine main talkative therapy is behavioural activation, which aims to create a practical way of combating depression. It provides motivation like small, positive changes, learning problem-solving skills to help tackle the issues that you may encounter. This is typically delivered in about 16 to 20 sessions. So after your first session, the therapist hopefully could learn more about the issues that you want help with. You and your therapist will then set out a plan which is flexible but intended to utilise the best strategies for you to achieve your goals. Some of the techniques that are most often used within the CBT model include the following strategies: cognitive restructuring, guided discovery, exposure therapy, journaling and thought records, activity scheduling and behavioural activation, role-playing, relaxation and stress reduction techniques, successive approximation, and logotherapy. I know I've just listed loads of information for you all in one go, but if you are interested and have time, they could be great to look into. I will, however, go through most of them in a future episode. Unfortunately, CBT is not as simple as sitting down and a therapist is going to fix all of your problems. Some people find it confronting and expressing their emotions is challenging. That's because it's a reasonably direct approach. CBT works on the basis that you are the expert. You are the person that knows yourself best, and therefore the onus is on you more than in other forms of therapy. So it's entirely understandable that for some people this is difficult and they struggle with this. However, it remains a highly effective treatment for depression. So it could be worth giving it a go if you get a referral. A recent study found that 43% of those who had received CBT reported a 50% reduction in their symptoms of depression, compared to 27% of participants who had no effect at all from the therapy. These findings were collected 46 months after the therapy and show that CBT can have life-changing long-term impacts. For people that find talkative therapies difficult and ineffective, there are some non-talking therapies available. However, you may have to try the talking therapies first. The most clinically common of these non-verbal therapies is EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. Though it involves some talking, it focuses on stimulating your eyes and engaging your 5 senses, resulting in slight alterations in how your brain processes and stores trauma and distress. This new therapy option was found in 2014 to be more effective at treating people with trauma than regular CBT. Another non-talking therapy is light therapy, which is a simple and highly effective treatment for individuals with seasonal affective disorder. In its simplest form, it involves making a one-time investment in a light therapy lamp. It doesn't help you actively work through your problems, but it could help take the edge off and put you in a better state to work through those deeper issues. There are also lots of exercise, nature, art, writing and reading therapies that are hugely beneficial for people, and I'll go over these more when discussing alternative therapies in a later podcast. For individuals that have become treatment resistant, there are more non-talkative options, such as repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, electroconvulsive therapy, and vagus nerve stimulation. These are very fancy sounding but relatively simple in practice. I won't go into too much depth about them as it will probably be incredibly boring, so I'll leave it to you if you want to do more research on them yourselves. These different therapies are treatments for slightly different variations of depression. Everybody's story in life is different, and so there is no cookie-cutter treatment for depression, just as there is no cookie-cutter cause for depression. However, we can separate them into biological causes and developmental causes. There is lots of evidence to suggest that your genetics play a role in the likelihood of you suffering from depression. For example, women are 70% more likely to have depression than men. This could be due to the hormones that women produce. While a woman is fertile, they make more estrogen and progesterone, which affect the neurotransmitters, the neuroendocrine and the circadian systems. These are fancy biological processes linked to mood disorders like depression. They also have the menstrual cycle to deal with, which for some women lead to developing the premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Then through menopause, the risk of depression decreases, but at the perimenopausal stage, there is an increased risk of major depression. There is also postpartum depression, where significant hormonal fluctuations increase mood severity, often leaving you unable to function and feeling suicidal for weeks. It happens to around 10 to 15% of new mothers. The biological impacts on depression explain how neurodiverse people have an increased rate of depression than typical people. Atypical people, or those that are neurodiverse, have different brains from the scientifically typical brain. Sometimes this is because of trauma, but usually it is genetic. An example of this link between neurodiversity and depression is ADHD. The genetic code that often causes ADHD affects the dopamine transporters. Because of this, they suffer from an imbalance of dopamine. Sometimes they produce large amounts of dopamine, and sometimes hardly any. This dramatically affects their motivation and enthusiasm to do things that can lead to depression and other mental health conditions. I find it fascinating to understand how your genetics can have an impact on your life. I believe that this is a topic that is not talked about enough. It could be massively important to so many people to understand how you have a genetic predisposition to certain things in life. For example, imagine how much support it would give women in these difficult moments in their lives to validate their emotions. It would also help neurodiverse people feel understood and accepted for who they are in wider communities. There are also developmental factors impacting depression. These are life experiences that we all go through that shape us into who we are. It could be an event such as a bereavement, divorce, illness, redundancy, and financial worries, to name just a few. There is a lot of debate whether our genetics or our environment determines our psychological state. But what we do know is that you have the ability to affect both causes. You can alter your hormones in your body using medications or therapies to mitigate the effects of your genetics. You can also work through the events that you have experienced with support to improve your mental health. And that's just two ways of doing it. What's important is to know that you don't have to do it alone, that there are people out there who genuinely want to help you. So there you go. Hopefully now you understand a little bit more about what depression is, how it affects people, and the clinical therapies available to people suffering from it. Thank you for your time, and see you in the next podcast.